Hello and welcome, everybody. Tonight, I'm very thankful to have on my show Justin Marler. So I'm going to start with the story. This is a book that I found. I talked about this on a stream before. The stream was called Sunday Stream, if you want to watch it. But I found this book at a monastery. I went up to Vashon Island, and this is the book that Justin Marler wrote. And you can see how it says master copy on there. And on the inside, it says Father John's master copy edited edition. And so I found this up at the monastery. They were having a priest made a donation of all his books when he was moving. A priest from Oregon was moving across the country, and he donated all of his books, his library, to the monastery. And the day I came there to the monastery, they were having a book sale. There were just all these piles of books were in the trapeza. And so I started looking through the books, and my friend had told me, if you see a copy of Youth of the Apocalypse, buy it, because it's a hard to find book. It's like a kind of a cult classic. And so I saw it and I just purchased it. I didn't really look at the writing or care. He said, the monk Nicodemus said, "Oh, well, it's kind of marked up, so I'll give it to you for $3." And then, so when I got back to the cabin, I was like, wait a second. I started thinking. It says Father John. So Justin Marler was called Father John when he was in the monastery. And so I said, I think this was his personal copy. So I messaged him on Facebook, and he said he confirmed that this was his copy. And that was how this conversation got started, that led ultimately to this interview. And so I've agreed to send this copy back because I felt it was kind of wrong for me to have his copy. I agreed to send it back, but I wanted to finish reading it first, and I just finished reading it today. So that is how this all got started. Now this is not my talk time. I'm interviewing John. So, but for people who don't know, some people who are watching, I mean not John, but Justin. Sorry. For people who are watching, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born and raised in Northern California. I wasn't raised with any particular worldview other than kind of white trash, sort of semi-Protestant worldview. I struggled with depression and suicidal ideation, trying to understand the world. Being raised as an American in Mickey Mouse, MTV culture was pretty jarring and confusing over the course of my adolescence and teenage years. And at that time, I started writing music and getting involved in music. And my first aspiration was to move to the Bay Area, where there's a burgeoning music scene, and get involved in music and try to make a way through music, as a performer and as a songwriter and as a recording artist. And I was lucky to land right smack dab into a pretty amazing music scene involving a lot of those early sort of punk bands that were post-metal hair. Bands like Green Day and The Offspring and Rancid and so on. And I was in that whole stew of young people all of a sudden becoming well known and having success in that area. And I was able to get into a band and record, get a record deal and record. And during that period, my soul was just languishing because it was being starved to death by modern culture and by lack of relationship with God. And so I started to cut myself with razor blades and going through episodes of depression, and most likely, in hindsight, bipolar or manic depressive, whatever you want to call it. And it was at that time where I was recording a record with a band that ended up becoming the metal world, that I hit sort of a rock bottom. And that propelled me into the question of, God, if you exist, save me. So after that, I said a prayer. And
what was the band? What was the band's name?
The band's name is Sleep. They're still around. They're still recording and performing somewhat. Yeah. They're not a radio type metal band. They're more of an underground band.
Okay, so tell us about you went into Orthodoxy.
Yeah, so I encountered a Russian Orthodox nun, and I ended up talking with her about religion, church history, Christianity, and so on. And because of my meager exposure to Christianity, the Christian path was more, appropriate for me, and I identified with it more than other paths. I studied a little bit about Amish and about Buddhism and a few other things, and they didn't really seem to be cohesive in their worldview. And so the Christian worldview seemed to be the most cohesive. So talking to her, I ended up visiting a monastery not too far from where I met this nun, and I ended up staying in the monastery for 7 years. And, during that period of time, I studied the church fathers, church history, and also I was commissioned by the head monk to do music as a way of reaching out to my generation of young people which were experiencing addiction, despair, and the suicide that I was experiencing too. And I recorded an album as a monk, like folk songs, and toured on that album. And it ended up becoming a successful venture in regards to outreach. And then Youth the Apocalypse wrote that, started Death to the World, which is a magazine designed to communicate to young people and using Orthodox stories and graphics and church fathers and church writings and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And so now here we are, years later, I'm in Texas with a family and with children, and attending an Orthodox church, 2 Orthodox churches here up in northern and central Texas. And that's where I'm at now.
Okay, that should fix it. You can hear me fine?
I can.
Okay, and I can hear you too. Okay, excellent. Okay, good. Thank God. Okay. So you were saying okay, now I kind of lost my place.
The abbot of the monastery, you asked about him. His whole life was devoted to translating and bringing the Orthodox faith from his Russian background into the U.S. So when he first was a young person here in the United States, he met Father Seraphim Rose, who's now well known, and their whole purpose was to translate these writings and bring the Orthodox faith to Americans, which was very weird at the time. Orthodoxy was Russian, Greek, these sort of, ethnic related sort of church experiences. And they were able to translate that to people like myself. And when he encountered me, in the news, there was lots of stories about young people committing suicide and having depression and addiction issues. And his heart really was kind of pained by that. And so he wanted to see if I could be a component into sort of evangelizing or bringing the faith to young people, which is kind of how that whole thing kind of launched.
Yeah, I kind of think about him as being almost responsible. He kind of gifted Father Seraphim to us, the way I see it. He kind of,
Totally. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
And okay, let's see. Now, let me see. Okay, I want to actually start with a well, you were mentioning you were having the depression and the suicide, and this was part of the reason he was bringing you in. I myself have a serious mental illness. I have schizoaffective disorder. I've experienced bipolar depression, horrible depression, a little bit of suicidality myself. Do you today, by the grace of God, I'm not depressed. Sometimes I get low, maybe due to the weather, but for the most part, I think thanks, due to the grace of God, I've kind of overcome that. How are you now in terms of how are you doing are you still feeling that depression and all that kind of stuff?
Well, if you kind of dial it back a little bit, when I was recording and writing that music for that first album that was very, very, very dark, music is an expression of the soul. And when you submerge yourself in dark sounds, dark music, whatever, it's going to have an effect on your soul. It's just inevitable. And obviously, in hindsight, I was contributing in a massive way to the problem. And yes, there's neurological stuff, and yes, there's biological aspects to this, and chemistry and in the body and everything. But if you add on top of that these sounds that are, you know, dark and depressing, it's only going to exacerbate it. So when I pulled myself out of that and left the music scene right when they were taking off, it was kind of like the worst time from a, you know, musician's point of view to take off and leave this music project. I needed to do it for my own sanity. And when I pulled myself out of that environment, the rock and roll, the music, the scene, and put myself in a monastery, I sort of detoxed from all of that depressive American rock and roll stuff, and all that garbage that was in my soul slowly was kind of draining out with this holier lifestyle and with the music there, which is purely vocal. There's no instrumentation. And the depression and the suicidal ideation went away very quickly. The depression went away over the course of that first 3 or 4 months. And I haven't really suffered from severe depression like that since then. We all have our little bouts of ennui or sadness, or go through stuff, or you lose a relative and it's hard, and grief and all that stuff's normal. But that deep pain and that deep sort of longing to leave the world it just evaporated. And it's clearly the monastic life is a healing balm for the soul, and the church life is a healing balm for the soul, no doubt about it.
So what would you say to people if they are out there today listening, if they were experiencing depression or suicidality? What kind of advice would you give to those people?
I would give them numerous directions. And it would be, number one, if you really want to battle with the depression, the anxiety, and the suicidal ideation, there are numerous things you can change about your life. One of them is exposing your soul to things that are good, not things that are dark and bad. Number one. And that would include television, movies, and music, all the media. And then the second thing, honestly, my priest told me this years and years ago. If you're feeling like this, exercise, get off your butt, do something, and also diet. All these things factor into, we have a body and we have a soul. We have a duality here, and church is pretty straightforward on that. And if you're mistreating your body, if you're mistreating your mind, if you're mistreating your heart, you're actually causing your soul and your body to be ill. And when you, like the monastic life, the diet there is extremely simple and very healthy. And that was absolutely a contributing factor. And also, we were doing lots of construction and work and labor and being active. When we're lazy, we are only inviting in sadness and thoughts and depression. All these little aspects of our life, if we slowly tweak them and avoid laziness, avoid, bad foods, and avoid dark sounds and dark imagery, we slowly wean ourselves off that, and the soul starts to heal itself. It's hard though, because our culture is saturated with this stuff, all of it, the bad food, the Doritos, the TV binge watching, TV shows, all this stuff is just, we're saturating ourselves with depression.
That's excellent advice. Did you ever have to go into a psychiatrist or take psychiatric medicine?
No. And back then in the late 80s, early 90s, that was not a common practice. It became more common later in the 90s with Prozac and that kind of stuff, but it wasn't really a common thing. And so I didn't see anybody at all. I saw the monks, and I got immersed in the church's sacramental life, which was amazing. Confession, baptism, communion. I mean, all those repentance, all those elements were what I needed. And it wasn't a direct, okay, I'm going to go talk to a monk about my depression. It was more like, here's the lifestyle. If you can withstand it and endure it, it will only help you. And it just worked.
So I think we probably might have had a similar experience. I mean, I still, my illness is probably more more serious than yours. So I do still need to take the medication, or else I will become psychotic. But the life in the church definitely helped me with my depression. That is for the most part, and the medicine didn't help. The medicine didn't help with my depression.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Now I'm going to shift to talking about music, which is the main topic that we've chosen for the interview. I'm going to start with a little bit of actually, I'm going to start with an anecdote. I think I was getting gas yesterday at the gas station, and the guy looks at me. He says, "Do I know you?" I said, "I don't think so." And since he had sort of started a conversation, I was sitting there with my phone, and I said, "Do you have any recommendations for music?" And he started, and he said, "Well, what are you listening to?" Because I thought, I'll check it out. And he said, he started naming off all these bands, and a lot of them were heavy. I think some of them were heavy metal bands. And the album he recommended me to listen to was Sacrament of Sin. So this is, so you're saying that's probably not something a person should be listening to. If that's the title of the.
It depends on the content. If it's
really
the Sacrament of Sin and it's talking about how sin is bad for you, it could be good.
Oh, okay.
Just hard to know, but it sure does sound pretty bad.
Yeah, like I looked at the picture and they were like, they looked like they might have been zombies, in the picture on the album cover.
Yeah.
So,
it sounds like an endorsement. So yeah, I kind of avoid that.
Yeah, I mean, I tried actually listen to a few songs, and it was just kind of this melodic death metal stuff. But if I knew what they were saying, it probably would not. If I read the lyrics, I'd probably be appalled at what they're saying. But so there is. Actually, I'm gonna read a quote. This is what you've been saying. I'm gonna read a quote from your book, and you quote. You are quoting in the book on page 173. I think it's St. John of Kronstadt. I think it says, and it says, "Do not be allured by the melodious sounds of an instrument or of a voice, but by their effect upon the soul, or by the words of the song. Consider what their spirit is. If the sounds produce upon your soul tranquil, chaste, holy feelings, then listen to them and feed your soul with them. But if they give rise in your soul to passions, don't listen to them, and throw aside both the flesh and the spirit of the music." And so this is you've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but we're kind of getting into the idea of like secular music. Can an Orthodox Christian create secular music? Is this, what does it mean to be an Orthodox Christian and a musician at the same time?
Yeah, and I've struggled with that very question for decades. So what I was, yes, that St. John of Kronstadt quote it really summarizes exactly how we should approach music for sure. But the church and the people of the church, the laity specifically, and some priests too, have actually sort of danced in and out of folk, sort of, they wouldn't use the word secular back then, but the idea of folk music, which is not directly religious music, and then the liturgical music. And you even have all the way up until now, you have, what is his name? John Tavener, taking St. John Chrysostom's liturgy and kind of modernizing it. And we've had this kind of thing with secular musicians, really, even Tchaikovsky, drawn to the liturgical music and also kind of translating it to a sort of a modern thing. And, just like St. John was saying in that quote, it's really about the spirit. Like, all music proceeds from the soul, 100%. So if your soul and your intention is actually holy or good, what you're producing typically isn't that bad. That being said, if the sounds are ugly, they should be avoided. So I don't think you can combine the two flawlessly without an impact. And I would use this band as an example, Demon Slayer. I love Demon Slayer. Their music's amazing, and they're Christians, and they're very straightforward about that. they're combining Christian messaging in lyrics, but what's produced at the end is complete metal, and it's abrasive for the soul. So there's a conflict there that they're struggling with. And I would avoid that as a Christian musician. If it's ugly and if it's kind of hurtful to the ears and hurtful to the soul.
You're cutting. Can you hear me? You're kind of cutting out now. I haven't. Hello. Oh. You cut out for like the last 10 seconds. You were saying if it's hurtful to the ears and hurtful to the soul?
Yeah. The last part would be, it doesn't matter what the lyrics are saying. I mean, it's not about the words. It's about the whole product, the whole thing you're putting out there. And this goes back to Johnny Cash and Elvis. They struggle with this exact same thing. Both of them wanted to sing and produce gospel records. And Sam Phillips at Sun Studios was like, that's fine, but that's really not what I'm shooting for. I want more secular. He didn't use that word, but I want more worldly music. And he kind of pushed them into their worldly music and songwriting. And throughout their careers, Johnny Cash is more, he talks about this more, but he just wanted to do the songs he remembered when his mom was raising him, which is gospel. And then you have these folks who do this career, secular music, and they weave into it lots of Christian motifs and Christian stories into a lot of their music, But at the day, they really gravitated towards the gospel, which is, it has instrumentation, but it's more pure than secular music. Now, when I was
Okay, it's freezing again, and you're back. So the last 10 seconds kind of got. It's you said you were saying.
So you get the gist of it with the. So when I've been asked, over the course of the last 15, 20 years to do secular music with different projects, and I always go to my priest to ask for a blessing for it. And he says the same thing to me. He says, what's your intention? And is it ugly or is it beautiful? And I think that's a really good way to view it. And he always says this to me when I kind of start doubting, doing secular music that has a spiritual bend on it. He says, always look back to Johnny Cash and where his heart was the whole time. You can do secular music, but we are walking a really fine tightrope, I believe. And at the same time, after saying all of that, I do believe that for the Christian, and this is what people don't want to hear, we should strip that. All
right, it's frozen again, and I'm sure he'll come right back like the last time, hopefully. Oh, we just lost about 20 seconds. Were you talking that whole time? Yeah, we just lost. Oh, you weren't? You could tell that it was frozen? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're back now. Do you want to continue the thought?
Yeah, I'll continue with it. So the part that even myself and, other Christians is kind of hard to hear is that I believe, our job is to be in the world, but not of the world at the end of the day. And so, I've been stripping away what I listen to and what I try to view in the media and trying to, I don't listen to metal or rock anymore. I love metal and rock. I love those two genres very much, but I've stopped listening to them entirely for the last several years. And I listen to gospel. I listen to, the gospel albums put out by Loretta Lynn and Johnny Cash and Elvis and all that kind of stuff. And the Louvin brothers have a couple great records, and there's a bunch of stuff out there, but it's still worldly in the sense that it has instrumentation and it has a beat and it has drums, but it's still edging me back to what I believe is the end all be all, which is the voice, the human voice. If you think about it, God is worshipped by the angelic forces and by humans, and it's all vocal praise. And I think that's the purest form of music to be had. No instruments, no drums, no bass, no rhythm section, but simply vocal music. And the Orthodox Church has mastered that.
Right.
Absolutely mastered that. The Eastern tones, the Russian tones, Greek tones. In over time, they've introduced some instrumentation, and they've tried to, Russians especially have tried to make them sort of grandiose and more similar to classical music.
Right.
Which I think we should even not have that. In a certain sense, I'm kind of I hate to use the word purist, but I think that that's where we all should end up. And I think that if you think about, what would Jesus do, that whole phrase, I don't think he would really be wanting to listen to Johnny Cash, And I think that applies to all aspects of our Christian life, is to strip away all these secular things. That being said, our modern world is saturated with it. It's dripping off of everything we get exposed to. And it's very challenging. 500 years ago, it was pretty easy to avoid those risky folk songs, in Russia, that folk song about that devil, that siren or whatever. You just, okay, that's not cool, avoid it. Now it's everywhere. And so we have to kind of manage all of that in a different way than any Christian society has ever had to deal with.
Did this when you're saying you stopped listening to this metal and rock, is that something like you had to make a conscious decision and an effort of will, or was it kind of a natural, just you're not into that anymore?
No, it's like all things that the world tugs on us. We love it.
Oh, okay.
I have friends that like to smoke cigars, on a after church, that's they get, a value from that, and I'm not saying smoking cigars, whatever, is bad. I'm just saying that it kind of applies to all these things, the pleasures, we, our goal is to strip them away. We all don't have to be monks, and we all don't have to not watch programs, but managing all of these is a conscious effort. Absolutely. Okay. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of will.
We have I like this comment. I'm going to show this comment. Too based for YouTube. I think Tunes is saying that YouTube is trying to shut you down from talking. That's why that's why it's blipping in and out a little bit. Okay, now how about the idea of using music as a tool for evangelism? Have you experienced success in that? Because you've had a long career of music, not only when you were a monk, but afterwards you continued to write songs and perform, right? So did that ever have produced fruit in terms of, because I know you had Death to the World, right? And that was that brought people, that was kind of using a modern tool and to help expose people to the church. And was your music becoming successful as a tool for evangelism at all?
100%. Even to this day, I've had thousands and thousands of people reach out to me that they want to talk about metal and they want to talk about Christ or the church, Orthodoxy. And a lot of these folks have been exposed to it because they know the story of that band that I was in, Sleep. And they know that one of the founding members, left to become a monk in a monastery, and that perks curiosity. And so I've been interviewed over the course of, decades about this very topic over and over and over again. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, thank you for exposing me to the church. One of my godsons, I have many folks that I've sponsored in the church. One of them, several years ago, he's into metal, whatever. And he encountered Orthodoxy in a pagan chat room, which I don't even know what that means, but he got exposed to it that way. And he happened to be living in Austin, and he's from somewhere else, and happened found out that I live here. And so he reached out to me on Facebook and said, can I meet you? And we went and we met at a cafe or whatever. And he typifies these young men who are in the counterculture that want something more. And when they stumble on Orthodoxy somehow, whether it's through me or somebody else, they're very interested and very curious. And he now has a family. He's married. He's got a child. He's baptized. His wife got baptized. And all that happened from that little nugget, that little kernel of a young man coming out of counterculture and metal, encountering a little glimpse of Orthodoxy and jumping full on into the waters, you know? So when it comes to the music side of things, I've, done several projects that are, I would say, using music for evangelism, which would be the Monk folk album, which I mentioned. But also I've been into alternative rock projects that pretty much all of the content that I wrote for those albums were all about spiritual warfare, about struggling with your inner self and your demons. All that stuff's built into the songs. And when I do interviews, people would ask me what the meaning of a song was. And so that would be a great opportunity to talk about these subjects that we're talking about regarding the church and spiritual life. So I have seen a lot of fruit in my years come out of music being utilized for evangelism. But it's really tricky. Like, it's an area that I struggle with to this day. Should I, have that secular sound and use that for a ministry, or should I not?
Mm-hmm. I like, I listened to some of your the punk songs that you have on YouTube. I liked them a lot. Did you experience criticism, and and if you did, what kind of criticism? What were the people saying about this approach to evangelism?
When I first started it out in the 90s, whether it was the print media, whether it was music, pretty much the folks within the church were absolutely opposed to it. They felt that it was mixing the world with the church. They felt that it was using the church and the church imagery, and even some of the melodies I kind of swiped from the church. They felt that I was doing it a great disservice. And in the beginning, it was very hard for me to get so much backlash when my intention was only to try to expose folks to the church, which can heal. And but the pastors, the priest, my confessor that was helping me through all this, he said ignore them. He said ignore them. And we were very careful. I've always been very careful not to take something that the church provides and bastardize it into something that's wrong. If you look at Death of the World as a great example, if you look at that zine, I didn't change anything. I used the church's imagery and I combined it with the church writings, period. I did it with a Xerox machine. I don't even know if people know what that is anymore. A photocopy machine, and it was all black and white, which made it look, I don't know, modern or edgy or something like that. But I didn't change a thing. And I have no remorse or regrets about any of that. And it only produced good fruits.
Sure. I remember when I think I was an inquirer. I had an old lady in my church who gave me some of those Deaths of the World magazines. I read them, or when I was still an inquirer. I give them back to her, but I remember actually when I read them, I was thinking, well, actually, I just read this in that book that I was reading, the other day that St. Herman printed. So it was basically, you were just taking pieces out of the books that St. Herman's was printing.
Yeah.
So, I understand that. So we had a story recently on the line about Isaac Hansen becoming Orthodox, and he's from the band Hansen that was popular in the 90s. I understand that he reached out to you sort of for mentorship. Is that right?
We were kind of connected by another person because we have things in common. And we've spent a little time together. We've stayed in touch, and we've talked about this very topic a lot, to be honest. And we pretty much have the same view. Like, he is still, as a profession, he still does music, and they still have, I saw them when they came through Austin, they still have a huge following, which I had no idea. But he looks at it from, okay, here's my way of making a living. And then here is my spiritual life. And at the same time, he's on stage and he's got a prayer rope attached to his belt loop, And then afterwards, he is sure to pray, and he's very careful to keep the world at bay. And he's able to manage those two worlds very, very comfortably. And I commend him for that. Absolutely. And none of the content that he produces out there is bad. It's just none that I've heard anyway. It's all just kind of pop type music, and he manages it really well.
Have you given him any sort of like advice? What kind of things have you talked about with him? Oh, you're frozen again. It'll come back. It'll be back. He'll be back. Just let it connect. Thank you for your patience, everybody watching. Hello to people in the chat. If you have any questions, in the chat, just think of them. Start thinking of them now. We can ask. So what kind of, did you hear my last question? What kind of advice have you been giving him, or what kind of, about how to walk this line of an Orthodox Christian musician?
I think it needs to be walked with oversight, which would be conversations with your priest and confessor about what you're doing and why. And I think a person needs to be very careful when they traverse this realm, because you really are, it's very easy, if you are successful, to get sucked out of your faith and into pride and vainglory and other things like that, where it's no longer about you being an Orthodox Christian and a musician. It's more like, I want praise and I want glory.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very dangerous thing for a Christian. So yeah, having some oversight there is important. And also always keeping yourself in check. I think self-reflection and self-examination as to what you're doing and why is huge. If you produce a lyric, you can often start as a poem. What's the content, and what's the intention? I'm always asking myself that question when I'm writing something. What is the content? What is the intention? And that would include some of the heavier stuff that I've done, which is still I don't really do that now, but I would always ask myself that question, So you're walking a tightrope, to be honest. And at the same time, the goal, just like there's a well-known Russian musician from the 90s that recently passed away. He was in that movie Ostrov, which means the island, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he is a good example as to, he was in secular music. He kind of made his way out of it, but did music as a Christian, Orthodox Christian, and then he just kind of abandoned it altogether. And I think that, again, even as an Orthodox musician, if we're not writing sacred music, I think our goal is to eventually sort of migrate away.
Interesting. Okay. Now, tell us about future plans. I think you mentioned you were talking about possibly releasing your whole catalog or something and going on a tour or something like that. Do you have plans in the future for continuing to perform? And
I'm sort of curious what doors open and what doors close. Right now, there's a record company that wants to re-release some of my material and believes that there's a pretty good market for, especially vinyl. They want to put it out in vinyl for this, and doing some shows and festivals based on these albums they want to release. And I'm open to it, but I'm just trying to see where God's will is in it or not. Like if God is not in it, I'm not in it. And if it's showboating and if it's just for my ego, then I need to not be in it. But if there's a door that's opening that's tied to this evangelization that we're talking about, then I'm totally open. If people are saying, I want that music and I want to talk about God, I'm throwing my hat in the ring.
Sure.
But if it's just touring, I'm not into it.
Oh, okay. Okay, interesting. So, all right, let's see. You have a website, unseenwarfare.net, right? That's your website?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's about, you have writings just about the I kind of like your approach, this to the spiritual life. That's kind of what the things that are on that website is sort of like the heart. That's kind of the monastic approach. That's sort of the heart of Christianity. You're not, you're not like in your mind talking about apologetics and theology and things. You're actually talking about struggling against passions. And tell us a little bit about that website.
Yeah, unseenwarfare.net is basically, since 1992, I've been collecting quotes from the church fathers about spiritual life for my own edification and to recall them for my own inspiration. And then after I left the monastery and had 2 daughters, I wanted to kind of collate all that. So that the idea was, if I died, this is what I would want them to know. Like, this is a survival manual. You don't need to know, profound theology. You need to know how to war with your demons and how to get closer to Christ. And if I was going to tell them anything, it's great to know about the Trinity. Absolutely. It's great to know about, the 2 natures of Christ, and all that stuff's extremely important. But at the end of the day, when you're going about your day with your thoughts and your feelings, your mind and your heart and your will, which is the 3 aspects of the soul, how you function with those is going to determine if you're saved or not, where your soul is, what your state is. And so that website is going to be coming out as a book, I think in 2023, this year. And then it'll be like a little bit of a manual that you can kind of carry with you with all of these teachings in there, which is, it ranges from, like I said, the anatomy of the soul. If you know about the anatomy of the soul, you're going to know how sin affects it. And if you know about how a habit forms, which we call a passion in the church, you're going to know how to, number one, recognize them and how to fight them and how to subdue them so that you can root them out of your life. And if you know what virtues are, you're going to start to try to practice those virtues. And as you kind of drain all this stuff out of your life that's negative or worldly or ungodly, and replace it with these practices, spiritual warfare and the virtues and everything, meaning love, kindness, compassion, humility, prayer, all these things, you heal yourself. And so that's kind of where the website's at, and where the subsequent book will be at. But it's funny to say, there's one part of the book that has a large quote from St. Peter of Damascus about, he lists all the virtues and he lists all the sins, a large chunk. We often think of sins as being, like, don't commit adultery, don't commit murder, don't lie, don't steal. But he has a lot in there. And one of them, which I think is extremely funny, when I first read through this, I was a novice just out of the music industry. He said in there, one of the sins is to play the flute. And I thought that was so funny, that playing the flute is really a bad thing. And I'm like, okay, I thought there was more, than just the flute, but I don't know. That's what he was thinking.
Interesting. Well, I think I didn't know you were writing a book about that. That'll be interesting. This book was excellent. I just finished it, read it in a week. And so, judging from your last book, this next one should be good too. And I understand, I'm going to be sending this to you. I'm going to send it back. I understand you're going to come out with this book again. So, because people can't get this, you can't find it, right?
Yeah, we have the 2nd edition coming out. We're working on it right now. It's in layout and production.
Oh, okay.
So I would hope in the next 6 months.
Is that St. Herman Press or who?
Yeah, St. Herman Press. I'm working with a graphic designer to lay it out, and we're changing a little bit of it. We had to add some in the front of the book about sin, because since 1994, 96, when that was written, that was pre-internet and pre-technology that we have now. And sin has taken on a completely new form that has to be brought up and addressed, including social media and pornography and all kinds of other things, you know. So we added a bunch in there to kind of modernize it, but the rest of it's the same.
Okay. I guess let's see what. I guess my last question is: do you have a word? Do you give us a word of advice, a word to live by? My final question.
Just in general?
Yeah.
I really think that I boil everything down in my life to Mark 12:30. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. If every person did that from every moment to every moment, every day, the world would be heaven.
Amen. And we've come to about an hour almost. If people want to get in contact with you, how should they get in touch? Are you there? Oh, it's cut out again. See, the YouTube didn't like that word. So if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Through Facebook, Justin Marler. That's typically how I interact with folks. I'm not posting on there. I'm not on there a whole lot, but I do check messages to interact with people.
Okay, and I put the link to a link to that in the description below. So this has been Young Penitent with Justin Marler. Thank you so much. And that is my stream for the night. Goodbye, everybody.